Hi peeps, happy Thursday. I hope that you all have been doing well this week. For those of you who have been doing your work every single day, I appreciate you so much and I miss all of you so much, and I probably could say that over and over again, but I do. And thanks for working so hard. I hope that you enjoyed my surprise guests. Last week was Mr. and Mrs. Bailey, and then my cousins and my honey and I, and then this week you saw Miss Cynical on Monday, my very good friend on Tuesday, Miss Bree, and then today you are seeing my honey and I again to end the week. So before I start reading, these are going to be longer. I think my chapter is longer to read than the one my honey's going to read after me, but today, just to give you a little reminder of what you read about, what Miss Bree read about. So, looks like in chapter 19, Anton decided to throw rocks at the soldiers and Major Von Dusen. And then when Major Von Dusen was laying on the ground, he had told Rena, David, her son, and Bubby that they had to hurry and run away. So that was exciting, but then we learned in chapter 20 that the German soldiers realized what happened and were searching all over for the four of them, and they started shooting, but Major Von Dusen had told them, hey, remember, we had to keep them alive because we want to know where the other Jews are hidden in the cave, and they ended up shooting, unfortunately, Rena and her son David, because we're going to learn why they were shot, but not Bubby and Anton, because when I first read that, I go, why was it the two of them that got killed, but not Anton and Bubby? You learn that in the chapter I'm going to be reading right now. But so that's what we learned, unfortunately, in that they passed away, and now we're going to read on. It kind of ended on a cliffhanger, so that's kind of scary, but here we are. We're going to continue on. All right, chapter 21, and then my honey is going to read chapter 22. Here we go. You see how I just held that book? It's upside down. Not good. Okay, chapter 21. Make sure you have your orange booklets out and ready to go for this video. Anton did not know what to say, so he's reacting right now to seeing all of them around Rena and her son David right now. He and Bubby watched the soldiers across the field arguing over the bodies of Rena and David. Why had the Gestapo fired their weapons? Surely to interrogate their prisoners and find out where their friends and neighbors were hiding. He felt responsible. An enormous wave of guilt washed over him. He should have had insisted Rena come with them, but she had not wanted to find the priest's grotto. She'd said she and David would be safer on their own, and now they were dead. So Rena and her son David actually separated from Anton and Bubby and just said, hey, we're just going to be on our own. We're going to do our thing on our own. So that's how they kind of ended with their lives there. Oh, Bubby, Anton moaned, what have I done? What have I done? Bubby took his hand and squeezed it hard. Anton, you did nothing wrong. Those men over there are pure evil. You have never seen it before. They have no conscience, no feeling, no remorse. You gave Rena and her son a chance. You did all you could do. Now, you must pull yourself together. We will grieve for Rena and David later. Anton knew she was right, but still he felt a sadness he had never known before. It weighed on him as heavy as the boulders that had trapped him only days earlier. Simile. The only way he could wash away his grief was to focus on getting Bubby to safety, but even then he struggled to keep the guilt he felt at bay. I am sorry, Bubby, Anton said. No, Anton, my child, it was God's will. Again, Bubby spoke of God. Anton wondered how she could maintain her faith in such circumstances. They walked on in silence. Each potato field they crossed looked the same to Anton. Time seemed to slow, the only marker the growling rumble of his belly. When they stopped to rest, Anton dropped to his knees and pulled a vine from the soil. Raw potatoes were chalky, but they were the only food around. He picked a dozen more and secreted them in his blanket. He and Bubby would not go hungry, but they would need to find water soon. Bubby, he asked. Yes? What do we do now? How do we find the priest's grotto? Remember, that's the place that all the Jews were going to get together in order to escape and feel a little safer. We head north. Dmitri, remember that's his uncle, says the area is full of partisans. There are people there who have no love for the Gestapo. If we can find them, they will help us find the caves where Dmitri and the others are headed. Well, how far is it? I don't know, Anton. I'm not even sure where we are right now. Soon daylight will come. Perhaps then we can determine where we are. But first we must find a place to hide. Anton had no idea where that might be. In the starlight, all he could see were potato plants. Bubby could not move quickly, and it would be dawn soon. Already the eastern sky was growing lighter. If the major had indeed called reinforcements, soon the entire area would be crawling with the Gestapo. Yet they had no choice but to keep walking. So they did, step after step in the soggy soil. Every bird that fluttered into the sky at their approach caused Anton's heart to thunder in his chest. He tried to will his grandmother to move faster, but he knew she was really going as quickly as she could. Anton kept count, and every 10 steps he looked behind him, studying the horizon and making sure that no one followed them. After another hour, Anton spotted a bunch of trees. Even better, there was a farmhouse, barn, and several small outbuildings on the other side of them. "Bubby, wait," Anton whispered. He gestured toward the farmhouse. It appeared deserted. With dawn approaching, someone should have been stirring inside. On a working farm, a lamp would be lit or a fire started before sun up, but the windows remain dark, so right now they found a barn that they think no one lives in, so they're trying to decide if they should go or not. Even so, he tried to remain optimistic. "Perhaps the farmer can help us," he said. Bubby shook her head. "No, Anton, you must never approach someone you do not know. We are Jews. Many of our neighbors are not. They will turn on us to save themselves from the Gestapo. We should keep walking." "Bubby, please listen. I am tired. You're tired. We need to rest. If we cannot knock on the door of the house, perhaps we can sneak into the barn. There must be a hayloft. No one will know if we sleep there for an hour or two. Then, when the sun comes up, we can figure out where we must go next to find Uncle Dmitri. We can find places around the farm to hide until nightfall." "I don't know, Anton," she said as she studied the house. Her shoulders slumped and she leaned heavily on her walking stick. He knew she was in pain, though she would die before she admitted that she was in pain. "Bubby, we cannot continue after the sun comes up. These fields are too open. We need to hide. Besides, they have water," he said, pointing to a hand pump a few meters from the barn. She studied her grandson. "When did you grow up, Anton?" she asked. "It was only yesterday you were toddling along behind your father, trying to do everything he did. Now you're almost a man." Looking up at the barn, she smiled. "Oh, all right. We will do as you say. We will hide in the barn. Wait until darkness comes again. Then we will find your Uncle Dmitri." Anton felt a tremendous sense of relief. Still, he was cautious. As they approached the barn, he kept the trees between them and the house. His instincts told him the house was deserted. Whoever lived there had packed up and left. But he wasn't sure enough to take a risk. Anton kept his eyes on the house, with its neglected flowers and worn-out front steps as they crept past it and headed for the barn. Bubby started for the door, but he gently took her elbow to stop her. He pointed to the pump. "Water first, Bubby," he said. The pump held a tin cup on a hook. It was made of rusted iron, but looked to be in working order. The trouble was, a pump like this needed water poured down the shaft to prime it, but there was no water available to use. So right now they're trying to get water from a pump, but they can't get the pump working unless they put a little bit of water in there to get it going, since it hasn't been used for a while. Anton glanced around. If only there was a puddle or a rain barrel nearby. But he saw nothing. Then he spied a watering trough on the side of the barn. He removed the cup and headed around the corner to investigate. A centimeter of water was a most welcome discovery. It would be enough. He scraped the cup along the bottom of the trough. Returning to the pump, he poured some of the water down the shaft and grasped the pump handle. He knew from experience the metal parts of the pump would squeak and groan when he lifted the handle. But if they wanted a drink, he had no other choice. So right now he was worried because he thought that the pump would make a lot of noise. But he was just thinking to himself, I'm so desperate for water that I really don't care at this point. He pulled the handle upward and was rewarded with a loud shriek. To Anton, it sounded as loud as a cannon shot. He poured more water down the pump shaft and the sound softened, but the pesky squeak would not go away. If there was anyone in the house, it would surely alert them. Up and down, he worked the handle, slowly priming the pump and with the remaining water from the cup. At first, he thought the well might be dry, but then he heard a gurgling sound as water worked its way up the pipe and finally spilled out. He pumped harder. He knew the water would be dirty and undrinkable at first. When it cleared, he rinsed out the cup, filled it to the brim, and handed it to Bubby. She drank it dry in about 3 gulps. He filled it again, and again she drank. Only when she was done did Anton take a turn. So that's really nice that he's letting his Bubby have that refreshing water before him. It's very gentlemanlike. The water tasted earthy, but he didn't care. It was like heaven on his tongue. He had not realized how thirsty he was. He and Bubby each drank another cup. All the time he kept his eye on the house. Though he suspected it was empty, he couldn't help expecting the door to open or the windows to illuminate at any moment. But the house remained still. When he and Bubby finally entered the barn, he flipped on his flashlight. The room looked forgotten. An old tractor sat in front of a double door, but its tires had long gone flat. A shovel and a sickle hung on the wall. Very little else was left behind. There were empty stalls where animals had once been kept. Now all that remained was a large pile of hay. The farmers had either turned their livestock loose or hitched them to a cart when they were leaving. Anton took the shovel from the wall and worked it through the hay, making sure it was free of rats and mice. Nothing scurried away. "We can sleep here, Bubby," he said. "If you are hungry, I have a few potatoes." "No, Anton, I am too tired to eat, and right now that pile of hay looks like a wonderful, comfortable bed." She lay down in the hay, groaning in pain. She pulled her shawl over her shoulders and closed her eyes. A few moments later, she was softly snoring. Anton went to the barn window and stared outside for a very long time. If the Germans came, they'd never be able to run, not with Bubby moving as slowly as she did. But he would have to be prepared. The door to the barn opened inward and latched shut on the outside. He propped the shovel and the sickle against it. If anyone pushed the door open, the clattering noise of the falling tools would wake him up. Then he removed the sickle from the wall and checked the edge with his thumb. The blade was full of rust spots, but the edge was still sharp. "This will make a much better weapon than my little hatchet," he thought to himself, as he laid down next to Bubby. Anton's eyelids felt heavy. Seconds later, he was asleep, with the sickle's hand clutched tightly in his hand. All right, so right now they found a place to sleep, which is awesome. They found water, they found shelter, but right now he wanted to think about a plan in case the Germans came and interrogated the barn for a plan B for him and Bubby. So right now I want you to pause my video if you can, and I want you to think of a chapter title for this chapter so it shows me that you did read. Also, while my honey is getting ready to read, I want you to think about when you go on Google Classroom, sometimes my questions are not about chapter titles. Sometimes a lot of you still put your chapter titles when I don't ask for them. So make sure that you read the question on Google Classroom because I always want you to make a chapter title, but sometimes I don't ask to see it. So make sure you think about that. But right now, pause your video, think of a chapter title, and then we are going to read chapter 22 with my honey, and it's a little shorter than mine. So
Chapter 22. Major von Dusen was livid. The sun had risen an hour ago, and he had been ordered to wait by the bodies of the dead woman and her child until General Steuben arrived. He understood that he had failed miserably, but the longer he waited, the farther away the old woman and whoever had freed her were getting, making them that much harder to catch. He had been furious with his 2 privates for shooting down the Juden. They knew he wanted the fugitives captured alive. If General Steuben did not relieve him of his command for this debacle, Karl would make sure those 2 simpletons were reassigned. He would have them sent to the Russian front. But Karl had to admit that the world would not mourn the loss of 2 more Jews. If the woman was still alive, she and her child would have been sent away after her interrogation. They probably would have died anyway. Perhaps they had been spared future suffering, but really that did not matter in the least. Their deaths were meaningless. Headlights cut through the morning mist as 3 half-tracks and a truck carrying a platoon of soldiers turned off the road and rolled to a stop. The column was led by a staff car, decorated with a Nazi flag on either side of the hood flappings in the morning breeze. The sight of the car filled him with dread. General Steuben did not wait for his driver to open his door for him, emerging from the Mercedes with grim purpose. If there was one thing Karl admired about his commanding officer, it was that General Steuben did not stand on ceremony or let the trappings of his rank get in the way of duty. He was a no-nonsense soldier who always got right down to business. And this morning, the business at hand meant explaining the absence of prisoners. Von Dusen suddenly wished he was anywhere but here. The general's uniform was immaculate, his boots polished and gleaming, but he did not hesitate to walk into the muddy field where Von Dusen and his men stood near the bodies. Von Dusen and his men came to attention. "Heil Hitler, mein General," he said. The general repeated his salute. "Heil Hitler, Major." He did not look at Von Dusen. Instead, he studied the bodies lying in the field. "Report," he ordered. Von Dusen recounted the events of the previous evening. He told the general about tracking the 2 Jewish men to the cave and the ambush that they had executed, and how he had not yet been able to make radio contact with the lieutenant he had left in charge of rounding up the rest of the Jews who had been hiding in the cave's many tunnels. The older man's expression never changed. "So you discovered a hiding place with many Juden. You left with 3 prisoners. Why did you not stay until the cave had been searched?" he demanded. "The old woman, mein General," Von Dusen said. "She was obviously an important elder, a symbol and leader of the Juden in the cave. In truth, I thought of shooting her there, to break their spirit, but then I thought it wiser to remove her for interrogation. I believe she is giving the others instructions, a coded message of some kind. It seemed a better idea to remove her." "I see," the general said. "And how did she escape?" "We were attacked," he said. The general's eyes narrowed. "Attacked? By who?" "I do not know," Von Dusen replied. "At first I thought a partisan militia, but now I do not think so. They had no weapons and—" "No weapons? Then how were you attacked?" Major Von Dusen looked down. He found himself momentarily unable to speak. Sergeant Eberhard, perhaps hoping to save himself from a demotion, spoke. "We were surrounded, Herr General," he responded with conviction, "and we were outnumbered. In the confusion, the prisoners escaped." "I do not understand," Steuben huffed. "If partisans attacked you, why are you not dead? Why did they not gun you down and take your prisoners? Someone please explain this to me." General Steuben's piercing blue eyes bored into Eberhard. Karl had no great love for his sergeant. The man tried too hard to please. He didn't think. He was no match for Steuben's pointed questioning. "We do not believe they were armed, Herr General," Von Dusen interjected. "Excuse me?" Von Dusen took a deep breath. He felt like his career with the Gestapo was crashing right before him here in the middle of a potato field in this god-forsaken country. The next words he spoke must be cautious. "We know the militias are low on supplies. We believe they sabotaged our half-track. Then, when we were on foot, they hurled stones at us." "I'm sorry?" The general raised his eyebrows. "I thought you said stones." "That is correct, sir." General Steuben said nothing. He clasped his hands behind his back and circled the bodies of the woman and her child. Von Dusen found it impossible to read his impassive face, even when the general completed his inspection and came to stand directly in front of Karl. "Sergeant Eberhard," General Steuben called, "you and your squad will return to Borta, where you will follow your reports and await my return." The sergeant came to attention and saluted. "Heil Hitler," he said. Turning, he ordered his men toward one of the half-tracks. Mach schnell, he said. The men marched away from the 2 officers in double time. The general was quiet for a moment. "What to do with you, Major? What to do with you?" the general muttered. "Sir," the general held up a gloved hand, "I do not need to tell you that you have made innumerable mistakes in the last several days. I'm sure someone of your intelligence and your ability understands that." Von Dusen sensed it would be best to remain silent. "If the Juden hear that an old woman has eluded you, it will raise their spirits. We must get our hands on her, and you will lead the search. You will find this woman and bring her to Borta. If you do not, the general's words trailed off. Thank you, mein general, von Dusen said. He could not believe his luck. It was still possible for him to salvage this mess and restore the general's fine opinion of him. The general turned on his heel and headed toward his car. Von Dusen followed sheepishly behind. As he walked, he thought about the attack. His hand went to the swollen spot in his head, where he had been clubbed to the ground. He had barely seen the face of his attacker, but he could have sworn it belonged to a child. No, he did not think a militia had attacked them. It was a single person. 2 at most. That boy, and perhaps another. His fury grew as he pondered how they had outwitted him. They had made an enemy last night, one they would regret.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so now Major Von Dusen was trying to find all those shoes, but now that this happened and Anton put a rack to his head and he fell down and he kind of ruined his mission and couldn't up his rank with the other general, now he's more mad and now he wants revenge. So I don't think it's gonna end well. I don't know though, I didn't read the book, but make sure that you make a chapter title for chapter 22, but also go to Google Classroom and answer the question for today. Remember, it might not always be a chapter title. I might ask you a different question too. All right, peeps, have a good Thursday, and we'll see you tomorrow for Debate Friday.